Welcome to the Exec Exchange, 15-minute podcast in which a leader from the water sector shares a story to inspire, educate, and inform other water sector leaders from across the globe. My name is Piers Clark, and today my guest is Tze-Ch'in, the Chief Executive of PUB in Singapore. Tze-Ch'in, wonderful to have you with us.
Wonderful to join you again, Piers.
Well, now we always start by learning a little bit about our podcaster. So now you've got a really interesting background. I think you're unique. I think you're the only chief executive of a water utility who has a military background. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you've ended up being chief executive of PUB?
Well, it's not entirely unique for PUB, if you know the history of PUB and our chief executives. Well, I served almost 25 years in the Singapore Armed Forces, Army in particular. My final job in the Singapore Armed Forces was Director of Military Intelligence. And I left about 6.5 years ago to join the public service, the Singapore Public Service. I moved around in several jobs. This is my fourth job in the last 6.5 years. And I've been PUB's chief executive for the last 1 year. It's been an interesting ride.
Yeah. And and forgive me if I'm not intending to blow smoke here, but the leadership skills you've brought from your army background, your military background are so inspiring and very obvious to see. It's incredible. So, well, thank you for that. Now, I suspect everybody knows about PUB. It must be one of the most well-known utilities across the world, but give me the 60-second description of what PUB is, how many people it serves, the services it offers.
Well, PUB is a public agency in the Singapore government, and we're about 3,500 strong. And actually, I suspect many people don't realize that the PUB is truly a water agency. We have the full gamut of responsibilities, from supplying good water to reclaiming used water, treating wastewater, claiming stormwater, flood prevention, as well as resisting rising seas, defending Singapore against sea level rise. So I suspect there are very few other agencies with this whole spread and spectrum of responsibilities that we have in PUB.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to touch a little bit more on the recycling and reuse, because of course PUB has been the bellwether, the leading utility over the last 20, 30 years on water recycling. But actually, I think it might be worth us just pausing for a minute to talk about the fact that that's because it's a national security issue. You know, the founder of Singapore made water central to what Singapore did, and that's part of the legacy, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. I always say that as chief executive of PUB, I stand truly on the shoulders of giants, and there's so many of them before me. And many of the things that we have done have been achieved over generations of PUB officers. Yeah, I'm just building on their success.
Standing on the shoulders of giants. What a great way. And the beauty of this is that if you do your job properly, people in the future will refer back to you as one of the giants' shoulders that they stand on. Now, the reason we're talking today is because, and today is the 26th of November, we're actually recording this on the morning of the day we're intending to release this broadcast. It's because you've just returned from COP29. Now, I'd like to start with you sharing a little bit about what's it like. Describe to me what a COP is like.
So, as you know, COP stands for Conference of Parties. It is a meeting of various parties to an agreement, right? And in particular, COP29 is a conference of parties for the Paris Agreement to fight climate change. So I was there. This is my second COP, by the way. My first one was last year at Dubai, COP28. So what happens there is that there is this two tracks of activities going on. There is a negotiations track between the governments to try to come up with a new deal. This year was the whole new NCQV, I think, or something like that. Yeah. Basically, the new goal for developed countries to contribute to climate finance for poor, developing countries. For me, I was there primarily to support the Singapore Pavilion. And it's a whole series of pavilions at the COP venue itself, spread across all countries and organizations. Last year was the first time I went, partly because last year was the first time that COP had the water theme day. And PUB got involved supporting Water Day at the Singapore Pavilion, as well as picking up speaking positions and opportunities at other pavilions.
And you spoke at a couple of the pavilions. What was it you were talking about?
Well, I think for Singapore, our water story is one of the most amazing stories about Singapore. And that's something that we constantly share at all these occasions. I must say that a lot of people, of course, are interested in how we have done water recycling, the whole story about NEWater, how we've made this one of our national taps, one of our 4 national taps in Singapore. But I went on to share something else I think perhaps less well known.
Sorry to interrupt, but NEWater, I think for many of our listeners, we need to just explain what NEWater is. And you can arrive in Singapore and you can buy something called NEWater. It's bottled water. It's got the word new and water presented as one word. But what is NEWater?
Well, NEWater is the high-grade recycled water that PUB produces from, well, we call it used water. By most countries, they call it wastewater. We treat wastewater, we treat it, we process it, and we make it in the high-grade water that we actually do not sell in bottles in the supermarkets. Most of it actually gets sold directly via pipelines to our industrial customers. A small quantity of it gets piped into our reservoirs in what we call indirect potable use, and then treated again before it converts into potable water that we then sell on to individual household customers.
That's my ignorance. It's because when I've been in Singapore Water Week or something like that, and get given a bottle of NEWater, and I assumed it was viable. So it's direct potable reuse, and it's something that Singapore indirect potable reuse, and it's something that Singapore absolutely led the way. Now let's get back. I interrupted your storytelling, so you were talking around what you've been doing on NEWater, and in particular, I think you have NEWater. You now also have Brew.
Well, I think for people who come to Singapore for Singapore International Water Week, Brew is not something that it's new to you, right? We've been doing it since 2018. And I think, as I shared with the New York Times, a bit of a marketing gimmick. It's there to show you how pure NEWater can be and how accessible it can be. And I think it is something that we're quite proud of. It's been something also that we have been showcasing at the Singapore Pavilion at COP since the pavilion started, I think, 3 years ago. And this year it was a subject of great interest amongst the visitors to the Singapore Pavilion.
Yeah, well, I can imagine everyone likes to get a little bit of free beer. And to make it, just to be absolutely clear, Brew is a beer that is made from the indirect reuse water.
To be exact, though, in this case, it comes direct potable use, right? So what we did, we have our NEWater. This is not the one that's poured into the reservoirs. This one was a whole batch of fresh NEWater from the factory, sent over to our partner, a microbrewery, who then mixed it to make Brew, which is a beer, right? And we sell it. We put it out in cans. We don't really sell it. It's a bit of a marketing gimmick to showcase how pure the water can be and how drinkable it can be.
Everything that raises the profile is good. Raises the profile of water shortage and water reuse. How much of that water did you have to take? How much of the Brew did you take to Baku?
I can't quite remember. Just I think a few thousand cans. Well, we just have to have enough to give out every day
to make an impact.
That's right. And it has. I think there's several nicknames that visitors came by. I think sewage beer was one, piss beer is the other. But I think it's important for us to realize that, water recycling is here to stay. And I would say that, one of the things that people don't realize about PUB, we think of ourselves as a utility, but we are a climate adaptation agency. We are in the business of climate adaptation, whether it's drought, whether it's floods, whether it's sea level rise, PUB is going to settle all of that, right? And we are in the business of climate adaptation, and which is why COP29, COP in general, the whole issue of climate change is something that's very relevant for PUB.
Well, that leads me to asking a question about the relevance of COP. We've had 29 of them. Why do we do them, and should we continue doing them?
Well, for anyone who has done international relations, COP just stands for a conference of parties, right? It's a meeting of the parties to an agreement. In this case, the Paris Agreement, which is basically the agreement across countries to fight climate change. Whether you sort of have to have it, right? The parties have to come together to discuss what's the next step for the agreement. How do you take this forward? So that's the negotiating track. But what's slightly different, of course, is this whole growth of this pavilion track,
The
discussion track.
circus that comes with it. You've got
That's
the
right.
conference of parties, but you've got thousands of people coming for the circus, the pavilions. Are they worthwhile?
I have to say I'm a bit divided on that. I thought for PUB, for Singapore, it's a great opportunity to share our story, showcase what we're doing to address some of the impacts of climate change, at least for the water side of business, right? And how we are ready. I mean, we are preparing for an era of water scarcity simply because Singapore by ourselves is already one of the most water scarce countries in the world. So we are preparing ourselves for a world that is even more water scarce, but in many ways, I think, compared to other countries, a bit ahead because we've been thinking about this problem for such a long time. People talk about how, NEWater, how we brought in recycled water into our mix of water supply. But people, I think, also don't realize that before that, in Singapore, we took several steps to, and I quote, make every raindrop count.
Yeah.
We really collect every raindrop we can in Singapore so that we can and store it, so that we have maximized amount of water we can collect for our water supply.
Yes. So we've got a couple of minutes. I'd like to just delve a little deeper into the things that Singapore, the PUB, is doing to mitigate against the climate crisis. You've obviously building some desalination units. You've got the water recycling. What are the other big elements that you see as being keys to your strategy for addressing climate crisis?
Well, I think in terms of water supply, I mean, the biggest concern, of course, is with scarcity of water, right? And how do you make sure that your water supply it continues to be there? I don't think we are going to expand significantly from our 4 national tap strategy, right? And for those who don't know, Singapore's 4 national taps, it's a combination of local catchment of rainwater, imported water from Malaysia, NEWater, which is recycled water, and desalination from the sea. I would say that we are really doubling down on recycled water. I'm sure for those we are in the midst of building an expansion to our Changi NEWater production facility. There will be a new NEWater factory that comes out with a new Tuas water reclamation plant in the west. So we are significantly and almost, I think, doubling our capacity to produce NEWater. And I would say that we are only limited by the amount of wastewater we generate as the source and feedstock for the NEWater to be produced.
Yeah. And of course, it can go around the loop a number of times if you're clever. You can use the same drop cycled around
Several times.
Singapore has been the pioneer. I joined the water sector in the early 1990s, and the work that was being done, I think it was called Water Factory 21 back then, was the pioneer of everything that was going on in membranes, which were this terribly new technology. And it's wonderful to see that sort of 3-4 decades on, Singapore remains a sort of guiding light, a lighthouse for the industry in terms of new technology and new ways of moving things forward. And long may that last. And I do think it comes down to the fact that the government of Singapore has recognized that water is a national security issue. And we won't find that same level of focus in other countries until other politicians recognize the importance of water there. In our last couple of minutes, we always like to finish with a sort of slightly cheeky question of asking you to go back 20 years and share with me any advice you now, with the benefit of the wisdom that you've gathered over the last 20 years. What advice would you give a young Tze-Ch'in if you could speak to him now?
Actually, I would just tell him, enjoy the journey. Don't forget, don't worry about how it all turns out. Somehow you will end up in all kinds of places. Because 20 years ago, I think I was still very much, I was a young officer in the army, very much starting out in career, dead set on, climbing the ranks, doing well in the army. And I don't think I would have imagined that leading the army, I would go through all the pathways that I have and all the journeys I've had and worked with all these wonderful people on very important issues, ranging from, of course, water now. At one point was lifelong learning and skills future in Singapore. And I think it's been a really meaningful journey and career. And actually in the army career too, when I left and retired in 2018, I told all my friends and comrades, I have no regrets. It was a great career and I had great fun. So I would tell the younger Tze-Ch'in, enjoy the journey, enjoy the ride. You'll love it.
Say yes to everything. That feels like the answer. Thank you. Tze-Ch'in. You have been listening to the Exec Exchange with Piers Clark. Today, I've been talking to the Chief Executive of PUB, Tze-Ch'in, what he's been doing in Singapore and what he's been talking about at the recent COP29. Please join us next time. Goodbye.